Hello and welcome listeners to the latest episode of The IA Talks AI, our podcast in which we talk all things artificial intelligence in the investment management and wider financial services sector. Today I'm here with a very special guest, Adam Granger, the founder of two companies, Accomplish and your non-profit Agentic Risks. So why don't we start off with a bit of background about who you are, how you came into the industry and the companies you founded and what you do.
Well, Lawrence, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me. I've been in the investment industry my entire career, other than a small misspent youth for a few years in the military. So I've now been in the investment industry for over 30 years, 25 of which I was in-house before I set up with the same team that we have running Agentic Risks. I set up Accomplish to manage the industry's global client experience benchmark. And the short story that links that with Agentic Risks is when AI agents arrived on the scene, we thought, let's make our client experience benchmarking business more efficient behind the scenes. So we took it through an agentic transformation where the kind of people who make lists of things that could go wrong and lists of things to make sure they don't go wrong. And by the summer of last year, we realized we had something that we needed to share with the rest of the world to make sure people who also get excited about agentic AI do so in a safe way. So the first thing that we did was set up a not-for-profit, as you rightly say, where we share risk and control and agentic AI governance frameworks for free. But nobody can do everything for free, so we also have a perfectly normal risk management consulting business as well. With just slightly different suffixes on the end of the Agentic Risks brand.
So Agentic Risk then, because you had something you wanted to share with the world. And so let's start by setting the stage for what that is. So when we talk about an AI agent, you have a specific definition for what you mean by an agent, and that's very important to understand why it is that you founded Agentic Risks to deal with the very specific nature that this technology represents. So perhaps we can start there with what an agent is under your understanding.
Okay, so if our listeners take away one thing from this session, from this podcast, I would like it to be that AI agents are not just another AI model, and that we perhaps need to stop referring to just AI as an overall phenomenon. We already know that we have predictive AI and assistive AI. A few years ago, there was a big leap forward, and generative AI came on the scene. Generative AI is the most powerful. It is self-directed. You can set it a task and it will figure out how to achieve that, but it is passive. And this is a really important point. It will create an output for me to review. What agentic AI will do is it will, again, plan. It will pull in the tools it needs, the ones that you've let it use. It will take actions. It will interact with its environment. It'll interact with other agents. It'll interact across systems, both internal and external systems, again, if you allow it. But crucially, it will then, rather than creating an output for my review, it'll create an outcome in my name. Done. Gone. And then the last thing, before I pause for breath, is really important to remember the final feature of AI agents, and that is that they can learn from their experiences, so they can adapt for the future, for the next time you ask it to perform the same task.
So I think agents, the way you've described them, are a more versatile technology than we've seen in the past. As you say, you use terms that we would tend to associate with human beings, like the capacity to plan how to address a task, and then to do it itself, as you say, to call on the right tools to do so. So I think listeners perhaps would like, and invoking the host Shruti Deb's question, her challenge to participants to describe things in ways that their mother would understand. And I think that
I agree with that rule.
Yes, it disciplines you, doesn't it, to describe things in simple terms, be it quantum or any other thing. So when we talk about AI agents and the kinds of things that we're going to want them to do that we've not been able to do in the past with older technology, what examples have you seen in the work that you've done with clients where they say we want our agents to do this?
So for an investment audience, perhaps the most common example is perform investment research. So rather than just getting a machine learning model to perform that, you could actually give a whole series of context, and creating the task is a mini project in itself. You can give it the knowledge that you already have. You can give it the context. You can give it the reason why you need to make a choice, the reason why you might not want to make a choice, and you can direct it to achieve certain outcomes. You can tell it what its output should be, and then it will figure out how it can achieve that output. But it could also be in the operations area, you could be looking at making processes that currently have a human, taking information from multiple different systems. You could get an agent to do that for you because it can go in and read information from multiple systems as well. I can just see those as invoking tools. So you can use this autonomy to increase the amount of automation in your organization, as well as to elevate humans, so that they can be looking at the findings of that research in that example rather than performing it themselves to higher judgment tasks.
I think the investment research examples are a really clear and good example because when we think about what that entails, it's usually the processing of lots of unstructured data. And by unstructured data, what we tend to mean is data that doesn't fit a familiar format. So we've lots of experience in financial services of technology that can say, okay, I see a field there, that information needs to go in that slot in that system, and it just kind of robotically moves that information around. Whereas agents have the ability to navigate unstructured data. A company publishes their annual report, the agent's able to read that, to find relevant info and put it where it needs to go, or to summarize it appropriately.
Can I add one extra point as well? For our fund management audience, it's easier to buy than it is to sell. Because to sell is in some way, potentially to say that perhaps our buy decision might not have been right in the first place, or, needs to come to an end. When we perform the research ourselves, the person that decided that we should buy something in the first place, we are bringing a bias into that. Now, agents have biases too that we can give them, but they don't have that bias. So getting their advice as to what our actions should be is a very useful second opinion.
I think that's a really good point. That one speaks to one of the advantages we might see in getting an agent to do something that in the past a human being has been responsible for. So another is, of course, just capacity. So an agent might tirelessly work through hundreds of annual reports in a day, in a way that a human analyst would find that very difficult. But what a human analyst can do, of course, is to read and to make judgments based on lots of summaries that an AI agent has performed for them. So I think our listeners...
That's right. We'll face a new type of exhausting. We'll be exhausted less by doing the doing. And if we get this right, we'll be exhausted by keeping up with all of the outputs, and keeping up with these incredibly capable agents.
Yes,
but sorry, I cut you off. You were moving to another question.
Hopefully, we may be exhausted in a good way, like when you have a good workout, in as much as we're focusing on the tasks that require human judgment.
That's a really good analogy.
The ones where we really add value rather than just summarizing. And that's not to say that there aren't some challenges that we'll get onto later about the extent to which what can agents be reliably tasked with? What is the role of junior employees in this new structure when agents perhaps do some of the grunt work? But the value is clear. So for agents then to be able to navigate some of these unstructured data and to engage in a more versatile way, that's down partly to their probabilistic nature, isn't it?
Yes.
So what questions did that throw up for you that you thought were particularly important to address and to think about through Agentic Risks, your non-profit?
Well, I think the probabilistic nature, which for our mums just means that they're very good at sounding plausible. And that's their forte. They're really, really, really good at plausibility, but they're not magic. There is no magic. It's just a plausibility machine. So how do you get the best out of a plausibility machine? Well, it's inputs and outputs again, right? And in the investment industry, if we've heard it once, we've heard it 1,000 times, the importance of data. But the new shift, the new twist for agentic AI is that we need to have our data structured in such a way that an autonomous consumer can use it, can retrieve it, and operate it with it. So we need to prepare ourselves beforehand. We obviously need to train our agents on data. So if you haven't got sufficient training data, then think about a different use case, because otherwise you're going to have quite an uneducated agent performing a task, and it may not go as well as you had hoped.
Yes. Perhaps another way to put that would be that you don't get perfect reliability out of the box in a way that we would with traditional software, as we're increasingly referring to it, which means that it requires extra thought, doesn't it, into how exactly we condition these agents to do what we want them to do.
Yeah, it's like we're being given the parts from which we can build agents rather than being given the finished software. We now need to create the capabilities ourselves to put the parts together and to make sure they're properly informed to perform the tasks that we want them to.
And with my sort of advocacy hat on, we have a role at the IA in creating rules and structures that enable this innovation to work. And one of the questions I think that regulators have and are grappling with, that we're grappling with, and you, of course, with the clients you work with, is how to reassure regulators, policymakers, that this new probabilistic technology is still going to deliver good outcomes for the end consumer, and that's a challenge we have to address in a new way, isn't it? To pass software.
Yes. I mean, the end consumer should always be at the heart of this, either by using new technology to increase our investment performance, or to manage our own internal economics.
So as regards the ultimate goal then of this technology, which is kind of good outcomes for the consumer, we're kind of starting to imagine then a new world in which we've got humans who are, understanding of the rules, what the good outcomes they want to achieve are. Increasingly, we've got agents that can help them deliver those outcomes. And they're working together. Now, your framework, your non-profit framework, which is freely available, you describe in detail, you have the analogy of the non-human workers.
Yes.
Working dogs.
I see where you're going.
Is the analogy you use. And I think it's one that works extremely well and is very good for telling people how working with agents is going to be new and something that we can tackle in ways that are familiar perhaps to people who've worked with working dogs. Perhaps you could describe that in a bit more detail.
So yes, and thank you. And we do find it an instructive and practically applicable analogy, and this is the working dog analogy that Lawrence, yes, you're familiar with. For anyone listening who isn't familiar with the analogy, it's quite simply that as a human society, we have for centuries been delegating autonomy to non-humans, but it's not in perhaps the scenario that you might immediately imagine, but we can and we do with our clients learn from it, and that is working dogs. So examples, the most obvious example that we see, on a daily basis is the guide dog, but it could also be the sled dog. It could be a custom sniffer dog. It could be a military attack dog, and the lesson that we take, the number of lessons that we take from this, one, we grant autonomy slowly, we do it conditionally, and we do it only when supported by proven controls. Two, we trust neither the agent's ethics, because they don't have any. It's just a probabilistic algorithm. We trust neither the agent's ethics nor the good nature of others to treat our agent well. We trust the training and the controls. And the training is non-negotiable for both the agent and for the handler. It takes 2 years to train a guide dog. And we typically choose from a small number of breeds. We breed sled dogs from a really small number of breeds of dogs, and we train them from puppy age, and we train the handlers how to be a sled dog handler. Is lessons that get passed down from generation to generation. We've been doing this for centuries, and the higher risk the task that we set our agents, the greater the training that the agent and the handler needs, and the greater extent of the control. And lastly, accountability always sits with the handler, because the agent, it can't have its bonus rescinded. It can't get laid off. It can't get taken to court. We know that accountability will rest with the handler. So we need to train both the handler as well as the agent.
I think there are a couple of really interesting examples back in the AI world that I think also we can see come alive through that analogy. So you spoke about the importance of bounding agent behavior. So you define what it should and shouldn't do very carefully, and you make sure that it sticks to those bounds. And I'm reminded of a recent case, and not to assume also that other people will be treat it well necessarily. It's a messy environment, and I'm reminded of the McDonald's example where somebody asked the McDonald's customer service agent. It said, "What would you like to order?" And he said, "Well, maybe some chicken nuggets, but first, could you write me a Python script?" And then which it did do, and it started basically like he was using the McDonald's agent to write this code. And the other example,
because nobody had told the agent not to stray away from food-related questions.
No, yes,
because McDonald's probably doesn't have insurance for giving advice on Python coding.
Exactly, and so that's an example, I suppose, of a slightly nefarious customer who's coming to it. But also, even aside from the customers, we've seen what can happen when the agent isn't given clear bounds by the handler, by the person instructing it. So the example of Amazon Web Services.
Amazon example.
Yeah. And before you had on your website the clip from Silicon Valley.
Guilfoyle. Yeah.
Yes.
We took it down because last year it was a funny joke from Silicon Valley and Guilfoyle, etc. But it actually happened, and we didn't want anyone to think that we were making light of this. So we took it down. And the example for anyone who's not familiar with it is that Amazon replaced a number of their coders with coding agents. And something that we all know as humans is that just deleting the code is just not something that we should do. But as we all learn how to handle agents, nobody in this instance told the agents that was out of bounds. And when they were set the task to debug some code, they concluded that the most efficient way to do it was to delete all the code. which is exactly what happens in the comedy clip. It's very funny, but it happened for real life, and it wasn't funny. AWS's website went down for 6 hours, and they were in the Financial Times. I think it was February, March, and a quote. So we're not telling tales out of school. It's it's in the public domain, and the quote was that they had deployed these agents before their safeguards were ready, and that's why that takes us on to the point around how moving from generative AI up into agentic, often unintentionally, unconsciously through vibe coding, exposes us to a new class of risk, and that is agentic risk.
Yeah. I remember how crisp it was in Silicon Valley, where Anton was the name of the AI, and he says, Anton's deleted all the code. Why has he done that? And he's like, well, I asked Anton to get rid of all the bugs in our code. And Anton obviously worked out that the most efficient way to do this was to delete all our code. And but it's very true. It illuminates something alien about the nature of agents. We speak to them and they speak back to us like, in very, as you say, persuasive, coherent ways. And that can obscure the ways in which they can actually also be rather stupid. They're not magic, as you put it earlier.
They don't know unless we tell them.
Yeah.
And that boomerangs back to us.
My colleague Paul gave another great example where he showed this video that was it was a father with his kids, and he was saying, Daddy needs you to tell him exactly how to make your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And they say, okay, well, you start by putting the peanut butter on the bread. So he basically just picks up the whole pack of butter and just plonks it on his bread. And he's like, well, there, I've done it. But it was to illustrate the point that you have to properly define what the behavior is, because otherwise you just don't know how they're going to behave.
That's right. You have to really spell things out and break things down, and prove the capabilities and start small. But I think we're going to get onto that. Yeah.
Yes. So that starts to speak to the fact that we need the right controls. So if we rather than simply trusting that agents will perfectly infer our intentions and deliver what we want, we have to go through a rigorous process of defining that behavior and also implementing the right controls so that behavior is consistently applied. Perhaps you can describe a bit more about how you've seen that play out in some of the use cases you've worked with your clients.
Yeah, when we're working with clients, we always advise them to begin their control assessments really early in the process, because the controls that you need for your agent will influence the platform that you select. Are they available to you? They will influence what you need your engineer to encode into the agent. So they will influence the build, and they will influence the kind of data that you need. And if the platform can't give you the controls that you need, and the engineer can't encode the controls that you need, and you don't have sufficient training data for the controls that you need, then you haven't got a very good use case. So keep looking for another use case. So it's very good to look at these things early. And a good example that is a novel example and something for every firm that is subject to the likes of DORA regulation is a kill switch, because we've got these autonomous agents and they can do things like getting stuck in a loop. Now, you might have an agent stuck in a sort of a, let's call it a non-damaging loop, where the worst it's doing is just incurring token costs. But it could also get stuck in a loop where it's turning and actually causing damage. And you need to have a proven kill switch, and the link to DORA is that needs to be in your incident management procedure. How many firms have an incident management procedure that will stop a runaway agent? I'll bet there's a really small number. But this comes to our point around how you need to make sure that you can govern these things, these incredibly powerful tools, before you start using them.
And I suppose that's something that you have to look at throughout the life cycle, isn't it? You mentioned the beginning part. So it's like understanding that the data has to be presented to the agent in the right format. Otherwise, it's going to navigate it with more difficulty, or saying, we need the agent to have these tools available to it, but you don't just say, well, we'll give all our agents access to all the tools in case they think you're shaking your head there. That's
think of the least privilege process. The principle of least privilege, it's called in information security, where we only have access to sensitive information on a need-to-know basis. I encourage everyone listening to translate that into the agentic era as the need-to-do. You might want to give your agent access to a system, but does it need to create data in that system? Does it need to be able to edit? Does it need to be able to delete? Or does it just need to be able to read? Give it the least privilege behaviors that it needs. Why? Because by doing that, you're de-risking your deployment, and when you're de-risking, you're increasing your chance of success.
Yeah, I suppose to return to the dog analogy.
Yeah,
we don't train we can have guide dogs and we can have police dogs or military dogs. We don't train our guide dogs to defend their owners against attack. But we do train them to have the ability, for instance, to say, okay, we're not going to cross the road just yet, don't we? Because they can override certain commands to keep their owner safe, but within certain contexts that we clearly define and train them to do.
That's right. The working dog analogy is you can take it quite far, because they are a sort of a general purpose agent as well as general purpose agents. And the point that you're making there is about what a phenomenon called intelligent disobedience. And there are lots of examples, but two spring to mind. The guide dog that refuses to cross the road when its handler encourages it to, because it can see what the handler can't see, which is a silent bicycle coming at speed that could cause damage to all three of them. In a sled dog analogy, you might have you might have your lead dog receives an instruction to go straight ahead, but with its paws and its eyes much closer to the snow, it might judge from experience that the snow straight ahead is not safe, and it doesn't want anyone to break through and go through into the cold water below. So it will be intelligently disobedient, and it will go around the unsafe area, and then it will get back on track. And we need to train our agents to do that, and that boomerangs back to us as handlers. These are lessons that have been learned over centuries.
Yes, it's clear how we can see that will enable agents to navigate difficult contexts, like, for instance, where you have lots of users in the general public, not all of whom are inclined to treat the agent sympathetically. Some of them will be there to kind of, indeed, red teaming is something that we can do to help manage that risk by properly subjecting these agents to the kinds of stresses and tests that they might be subject to in the wild, as it were.
Yes, and for our mum who might not know what red teaming is, it's basically adversarial testing. So if we think about a deterministic software, we don't deploy it until somebody completes what we might call confirmatory testing. They say, I've proven that it does everything that we want it to. Adversarial testing does also, not saying you do one or the other, you need to do both, is finds out how the AI will fail, because then you can put the controls in place and the monitoring in place to, one, ensure it doesn't, or two, catch it fast.
Yes. And it's tricky terrain for an agent, or indeed a working dog, to navigate, because we don't want them to have complete autonomy, because then we no longer have control over their behavior. But we do, in certain circumstances, want them to, as you say, to refuse a command, because the safest thing is for it to refuse a command rather than to let its user walk in front of a speeding bicycle. Or
that's right. So I think that touches on a couple of different points. One, there are agents and there are agents and there are agents, and we encourage our clients to take a risk-based approach. So start with low-risk agents, then move to medium-risk agents, and only when you're really ready and you've got a full set of governance and controls in place, if you need them, move to higher risk capabilities.
And you, in your framework, you articulate a bit more about what that low, medium, and high risk looks like. Perhaps you'd like to run us through, low risk. Presumably, that a human is very closely monitoring it at every stage. Medium risk is gives the system more autonomy, and high risks still more autonomy. How do you classify those?
So, just to give some, perhaps to answer through some examples, a low risk agent might just be a productivity assistant, helping you, manage your calendar, respond to emails, something like that. It's accessing public data, and it has limited autonomy. And it's helpful to look at it this way, because then for an agent like that, a company could say, well, perhaps we just need a register and a test, governance system. A medium risk agent, let's say it's accessing business data as opposed to just calendars. Let's say it's reasoning independently and but pulling together data from across different systems. That needs governance. It needs controls. It needs to make sure that when it goes into those systems, the agent can only read if that's all that it needs to do, that it can't delete, can't cause any damage. And then you've got your high-risk agents that can act independently. They're probably dealing with confidential information, or they may be dealing with external systems. If they are interacting with other agents through a concept called orchestration, then that's probably a sign that you're looking at high risk agents as well. And we would also say if they have external exposure, then you need to put a full set of governance and controls around that.
I suppose if we consider the Amazon Anton coding example, this is with the benefit of hindsight, of course, but you might go back and say, well, the problem there was that we should have first asked it to scan our code, find the errors, and then tell us what it's intended to change and how, rather than simply giving it full autonomy from the outset to say, find and fix all bugs,
That's right. You would take a much more step-by-step approach if you were doing that a second time, and you would give the agent more knowledge beforehand about do's and don'ts.
And that kind of step-by-step is one of the processes that you've learned through working with clients directly on agents, is that's a really important way in which to work towards an agent that can do a process, is to really think carefully about what steps you should break it down into.
Yes, I don't want to sound hackneyed, but you'll find US Navy SEALs talking about slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So yeah, take it, start small, and build your capabilities small. Prove to yourself that you can do it, and then combine them.
Are there other risks then we should consider in the context of agents? We've spoken a bit about some of the setup risks, the tool risks, but there are also risks once you've deployed your agent. Perhaps we should.
Yes. I mean, drift is the obvious one that we should mentioned at the start when we were talking about what is an agent, that it can learn from its experiences so that it can, I'll say, adapt. It can adapt in a way that is an improvement. It can adapt in a way that it might consider to be an improvement, but you, the owner, might not consider to be an improvement. So you have what's called behavioral drift. And as a result of that, your risk assessment that you conducted 3 months ago on your agent is not valid, because the agent today is different to the one that you assessed. So we need to move from static governance to dynamic governance. That's a risk of an individual agent. There are new risks with multiple agents and orchestration. Another big risk category is security. And these are all becoming very well documented. The one where we believe requires a greater focus is what we call the human factors, because right now we're all learning about the technicalities of agents. We need to spend at least as much time learning about the technicalities of handling agents. And that's back at us. How do we make sure we're not over trusting these things? Because they're not magic; they're just plausibility machines. How do we make sure that we are maintaining our own skills? Do we have AI challenge roles? Because if you're not challenging your AI, it's learning what it wants to learn. It's not learning what you want it to learn. Sometimes you need to guide it back. And are we doing that? Are we swapping the people around who are in oversight roles to make sure that it doesn't get too repetitive? Are we swapping around the AI challenge roles? Are we having non-AI days to make sure that we can all still do things? And then actually doing some tasks that you've had an agent do for a while becomes refreshing, because it can be exhausting keeping up with a machine moving at speed and producing incredible output.
Yes, and I think that's one of the challenges that comes with a more versatile, capable technology. In a way, you rightly call them sort of they're built for coherence. What was the term you used? The P word.
Plausibility.
So they're plausibility engines, sounding right. And we've often seen in talking to chatbots how if they do something wrong and you challenge them on it, sometimes they'll apologize and change tack. Other times they'll just double down on what they've said. Depending on how you challenge it, it might say, no, I am right and this is why. And that's a quite obvious example where you've caught it doing the wrong thing, and you can see that it perhaps considers, well, I can explain this problem away, and you say, okay, I've caught you. But with model drift, you could have a situation in which it's constantly receiving implicit feedback, i.e., I've executed this process.
It's infinitesimally incremental.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone else played this game. I did when I was a kid, and it was kind of like a sort of fun game that we would do, on a warm day at school, if a teacher was feeling fun, and it would be, you had to wear a blindfold, and your friend behind you would point you towards a tree and give you a gentle nudge, go in that direction. And you would walk, and the analogy is you with the blindfold on, you're the agent. You'll walk towards a tree and you'll be so sure that you have not deviated from your direction until, the person running the game says, okay, blindfold's off. And you will realize that you have incrementally veered off course, sometimes quite dramatically. That's behavioral drift. Yeah.
Because if they're not, they might not be receiving proactive feedback on every one of the hundreds of processes they're executing a week. But if they're slightly off in some of their judgments through that process, their inference is, well, I haven't been told I'm doing this incorrectly in any way. And just slowly and incrementally, as you say, they start to drift off course. And before
if they're not learning from the handler along the way, all they're doing is learning from themselves. They have to get feedback from the handler.
Which I think returns us to the point that you raised earlier, which is, not just looking at this in terms of how we set up our agents and bound them and control them, but also about the handler training. And your friend who's behind you, with you trying with your blindfold on to reach the tree, that person we're now saying is going to have an important and new role, essentially in attending to this agent and making sure that it stays on course.
We can't stretch that analogy too far, but clearly in that scenario, the person behind has to have a way of actually controlling that the person with the blindfold on actually gets to the destination if they have a vested interest. Let's say if they're accountable for the tree being reached. So yes, and that's where I think we need to spend some time on the human side of all of this, because we're all being sprayed with agents at the moment by technology platforms. But this is not just a tech upgrade. This is bigger than that. And I'm going to end with a message of hope, 100%, especially for people listening in a regulated industry. But let's be clear, for centuries, the organization has been a human-only structure, right? in our companies, in our public sector organizations, institutions, in our schools, in our universities. We hired people, we gave them roles, we set them inside reporting lines, and we held them to account. But we now face the prospect of the human agent organization, where we work alongside a non-human workforce to whom we delegate the completion of tasks to varying degrees of autonomy, depending on our own capabilities to control that autonomy and depending on our own judgment as to what is appropriate for the situation. Now, we've seen big changes in delegation in the past. Most recently, you've got business process outsourcing, where we have delegated lower context tasks, but to humans, not to non-humans. And there's a big difference, because a non-human is unable to bear legal, regulatory, or moral accountability. They are operating at machine speed, and there's an entire workforce that can scale elastically. So the move to the human agent organization is best seen as a shift in the external environment to which an organization, be it an asset manager or any other organization out there in any industry, needs to decide how they wish to respond.
The human agent organization. So you heard it here first. That is the change that we're hurtling towards. And I think that some people, agents seem like quite a distant prospect for them, but I think that really it's worth dwelling on the tools that we have that already work in this way that we engage with. So one that I'm familiar with and lots of listeners perhaps have engaged with already are deep research agents. So we call them agents because, as you said earlier, you set them a research goal rather than simply to answer one question. They plan how to go about answering that question or producing that research. They select their own sources, so they review, often they perform a Google search for you and then review the outputs and then appropriately make judgments on which ones are relevant, how they are relevant to the output, and then to synthesize that into a good quality output. And these many steps, they can go wrong at any point. So, lots of us have used them, know that if you don't properly define how you want it to go about that task, if you don't say who the audience is, if you don't say what the relevant sources are, then you're liable to just leave it to make those calls itself.
You crash your sled.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're just like, go forward and get me to...
You blame the dog?
Yeah, exactly. Blaming the dog. And so we do actually, lots of us who don't already work with kind of some of the whizzier agents already have experience of this. It just means that we now can start to see how the mix of skills and the, as you say, the organizational structure might change to reflect the new way we're going to work with agents.
I think we can say that it will change. We now have this new workforce that has a vast capacity for information processing. That means organizations need, if they want to, I guess, prevail in this new era, will want to think about which of their internal processes they want to re-engineer to leverage this new capability. When we re-engineer processes end to end, we're essentially transforming the division of labor. Because right now it's which human do we give something to? But in the human agent organization, it's, what's the division of work we give to the humans and work we give to the agents? So I see an org chart that is not just a map of people alone. And at the moment we talk about span of control, I think we'll soon be talking about span of agency. And when the structure changes, the skills that we are going to value will change as well. So the human role, may shift from just producing good work to actually supervising good work, to identifying what is a good use case, to designing it, to crafting it, to make sure you break it down, make sure you thought of all the do's and all the don'ts, to proving it, controlling it, overseeing it, and then selecting the best output, and maintaining your judgment. And then all of this, is going to result in, I believe, an interesting inflection in culture, where we're going to start talking about, how, under what circumstances do we trust and challenge a machine?
There's been a lot of hand-wringing as well about what this shift might mean for, say, junior workers coming in newly into the workforce, and hearing you describe those new skills there, it does strike me that that there's clearly a role for junior workers in this. People who imagine that the manager can just define, okay, this is what the agent should do, and off it goes, and now we don't have junior workers, is missing all the points you made there about the importance of ongoing monitoring, making sure it's appropriately bounding, understanding how the AI works, knowing what good looks like. I mean, when I think about my deep research agent, now potentially, because the agent can do lots of research and synthesize lots of reports, I have the opportunity to learn from, say, half a dozen reports as to what good looks like. What did I think was good about that report versus that report? Bring it together, because we're not going to go straight to a world in which an omniscient manager can just put in the perfect prompt and get exactly the output they want, or design the perfect agent that delivers the outcome. It's going to require people who learn the new skills of agent design, agent monitoring, and also learning what those good outcomes are and how an agent can achieve those.
That's exactly right. At the start of our careers, we're going to need to be agent handlers. Managers will need to be managers of handlers, and seniors will need to spend their time on the division of labor, because the unit of strategic capability is going to shift from just headcount and time to the quality of supervision and the quality of that workflow.
Yes. Quality, I think, is the term that captures it, doesn't it? It's sort of, if I can get an agent to produce me 3 research reports, I still need to cultivate the skill of understanding what's good in each of them, or what meets the quality mark that we're trying to achieve.
Yes. And then the next question, if I were an HR director, would be, well, we already have ratios and theories about how many staff a manager, what their capacity is. How many agents can an agent owner oversee whilst maintaining quality without becoming too robotic themselves? How will we overcome automation bias, where we just approve because we overtrust the machine?
Yes, and we haven't even got onto the vision that some people have at the far end of entirely agent-run businesses. But I think I'm sensing you might have a note of skepticism to sound on that point, given the essential role that you think humans still play in organizations.
Yes, there will be, humans will play an essential role in organizations, particularly regulated organizations, and that's where I'd probably like to land my final message. But before I do, for those who've been watching closely, Argentina has recently allowed the agent-only legal entity. I'll go out on a limb. I think it's a mistake. I think we should not grant AI legal personhood, because we have already had instances where, sadly, AI has resulted in the worst possible outcome for a human. And in those instances, typically the families want comfort that it can't happen again. And just being told that the agent has been turned off is no comfort when another agent-only organization that has no incentive, has no ethics, has no incentive, it can't have its bonus cut, it can't have its reputation tarnished, it can't become unemployable, it can't get taken to court and thrown in prison. All of these ethical controls that we have over humans, they do not apply to agents. So let's bring this to a hopeful conclusion, because it's not going to be an agent that replaces me, Adam Granger. It's going to be someone else who has built an agent that will do that. So my message to everyone listening would be to overcome natural fears and trepidation. That Lawrence, when we spoke earlier over lunch, we both felt I think it's natural to have those feelings, overcome them, and learn. And you're only learning when you're making mistakes, and learn from those mistakes. We mentioned about red teaming. Finding failure is now the only way that you should, the only reason why you should deploy an agent, because you know how it fails. And my last point is, no regulator is ever going to want to accept accountability from an agent. It's always going to accept accountability from a human. So be pleased that you'll be learning about agents in a regulated industry because it's always going to need humans.
Yes. And I think the scene that conjures in my mind is one of, if we all have our own agents helping us, our own working dogs, say, then that naturally causes us to start to think about, okay, so what does the social infrastructure need to look like to make that work? So, the bus and the train would need to be designed differently if everybody got on them with their guide dog or their helper dog. And in some ways, I think that what we're going through now as organizations is a process of, as you say, learning what's out there, imagining what the future might look like, and trying to build towards that future, because it's one of enormous possibility if we get it right. We can do much more and deliver a much better service with people and their AI agent helpers, essentially.
Yes, but it's not going to happen overnight. We're developing an entirely new capability. Don't just build agents. Build your own agentic capability. Deploy them when you're ready to control them. Otherwise, and the data is already out on this, if you try and run before you walk, you'll trip up.
And on that message of hope,
I'm very hopeful, particularly for this particular audience.
I am too. I think we have to build it and get there. And to the listeners, I thank you for listening. I will include in the description the link to Adam's Agentic Risk framework. I think it's extremely good reading. The dog's analogy is there, and it's also lots of really practical insights that readers and listeners can use to help to start to think about how they can deploy agents in their organizations. So please do visit that and get in touch with Adam with any further questions. But otherwise, just to thank you all for listening and join us in the next one.